Welcome to the Meridians virtual celebration of the contributors to Volume 22, Issues 1 and 2. I'm Janetta Candelario, editor of Meridians and professor of sociology, Latin American and Latino studies, and the study of women and gender at Smith College, of which I'm also an alumna, class of 1990. Before we begin our program, I'd like to note that Smith College stands on Nonotuck land. We also acknowledge our neighboring indigenous nations, the Nipmuc and the Wampano to the east, the Mohegan and the Pequot to the south, the Mohican to the west, and the Abenaki to the north. As part of our commitment to both acknowledging and addressing the ongoing effects of settler colonialism on indigenous peoples of the world and of the area, in addition to considerations of indigeneity in the spring 2023 issue focused on BIPOC Europe, which we are celebrating today, Meridians has fully devoted 2 forthcoming issues to indigenous feminisms across the world, to be published in the spring of 2024 and spring of 2025. We consider these preliminary steps towards fuller incorporation of indigenous and decolonial feminist knowledge producers into the Meridians mission. I'd like to also take a moment to remember the tens of thousands of migrants, exiles, and refugees of political regimes, global climate change, and war, who've had to suddenly leave their homelands on a wing and a prayer. May they be welcomed and supported wherever they find themselves. Finally, we stand in solidarity with all who have been made targets for state-sanctioned, funded, and driven vigilantism against women's bodily autonomy here in the United States and globally, as well as those whose lives have been destroyed by the nearly normalized proliferations of gun violence in the United States, and with all those who continue to struggle against nationalism, fascism, fundamentalism, and patriarchal violence of all kinds. Before we formally begin our program, I'd also like to thank the Smith College-based staff members who have been doing and continue to do the critical behind-the-scenes work of operationalizing the Meridians project, especially Ali Einbinder, editorial office manager, Eliana Mercedes, editorial assistant, and our 5 fabulous student interns. Now, finally, we turn to what we hope will be a dynamic conversation between Meridians contributors to Volume 22, Issues 1 and 2. Issue 1, published in late spring 2023, is focused on BIPOC Europe. It has this beautiful cover, and was guest edited by Nana Osei-Kofi and Shirley Ann Tate. Joining us today to represent both guest editor is Nana. Issue 2, published just a month ago, here it is, featuring the beautiful cover art of Gina Ulysse, was curated in-house and is titled Mosaic, and we are joined today by contributors from both issues. In lieu of formal talks or presentations, our participants are invited to respond at will to some questions that I will be asking. As much as is possible in a virtual gathering, we hope to replicate the feeling of conviviality and engaged conversation, and we really take a great amount of pleasure in introducing you to one another, as well as to our audience members. In order to ensure that everyone gets an opportunity to speak at least once, and since our event is only 90 minutes long, not everyone will answer every question. Instead, I ask that 2 or 3 or 4 of you answer any given question, the one that moves you to respond, so that everyone gets at least one opportunity to speak. But before we begin that, I'm going to ask you to go around and introduce yourselves by your full name, your pronouns, if you like to state them, where in the world you are joining us from, and the title or nature of your contribution to the volume, beginning with Devaleena Das, who is to my left on the screen. And then please pass it over to someone else on the screen.
Sure, thank you. Hi, I am Devaleena Das, and I am an associate professor of women, gender, and sexuality studies. And I hold a joint appointment in the Department of Family Medicine at University of Minnesota Medical School, and also in the Department of Studies in Justice, Culture, and Social Change at Duluth campus. My article is titled, What Transnational Feminism Has Not Disrupted Yet Toward Quilted Epistemology. And I am going to ask Cami Fletcher to introduce herself. Sorry, I forgot to mention my pronouns are she, her, hers. It's written.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Cami Fletcher. I'm the Associate Professor of American and African American History at Albright College, also the co-coordinator of Women and Gender Studies here. My contribution to this amazing panel and journal here, I'm so fortunate to be a part of, is I'm looking at Black women who have been hidden in plain sight of death care work in the early 20th century in the US. Pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm going to pass it over to Luz Maria.
Thank you. I'm Luz Maria Gordillo. I'm the Assistant Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusive Excellence at WSU. I'm an Associate Professor in the History Department. And the title of my piece is Gendering the Nador Melilla Border, Immigrant Muslim Women, Economic Underdevelopment, and Structural Violence. I look at the militarization of the Nador Melilla border and the implementation of hostile immigration policies that affect Muslim women who carry different articles on their bodies back and forth from Melilla and Nador in Morocco. And I'm going to pass this to my colleague, Erika.
Gracias, Luz Maria. My name is Dr. Erika Hisala Abad. My pronouns are she or they, and I'm in the Mosaic issue, and I've published a poem called Farm of Forgetting in honor of my grandmother, who died during the Puerto Rico earthquakes of 2020. And I will pass it on to Julie Torres.
Hi, everyone. My name is Julie Torres. My pronouns are she, her, ella, and I am an assistant professor of Women's and Ethnic Studies, as well as the Latinx Studies Coordinator at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. And the title of my article is We Are Orlando, Silences, Resistance, and the Intersections of Mass Violence. And I will pass it over to Gina.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gina Athena Ulis. I am coming to you live from Santa Cruz, California. I'm a professor of feminist studies at UCSC, and my art is on the cover of the Mosaic issue that just came out. I will pass it on to Claudia.
Thank you, Gina. Claudia Sandoval Romero. My pronouns are she, they, it. I am writing my dissertation at the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, where I'm connected from today. And my contributions to BIPOC Europe was my photo essay, Strategies of Visibilization, searching for contact zones between the periphery and center in mumok's exhibition, 1998 to 2018. And I would like Natalia to introduce herself. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Natalia Koutsougera, and I work at Pantheon University in the Department of Social Anthropology. I'm a lecturer there, actually laboratory teaching staff. It's a special position for us. My pronouns is she or they. And the title of my article is Out in the Streets, Hip-Hop Narratives in Contemporary Greece. I'm engaged with hip-hop and rap and dance communities in Greece. And I am also the producer and director of 3 actually ethnographic documentaries on these issues. So I'm passing the word to Jasmine.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jasmine Kelekay. I'm a postdoctoral scholar in the Department of African American and African Diaspora Studies at UC Berkeley, which sits on the territory of the Huichin, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. My contribution was for the special issue on BIPOC Europe, and the article was called Writing Letters as Counter-Archiving, an Afro-Nordic Feminist Care Practice and it was authored together with my colleagues who together form Collective Omsorg, which in English translates to collective care. And so we're an Afro-Nordic feminist collective thinking about how to do work and engage each other through a politics of care. And I'm not sure who hasn't gone yet. Let's see. I will pass to Nana.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nana Osei-Kofi, her co-editor of and Tate and Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies University, and thrilled to see so many contributors to the special issue for today. So,
Nana,
awesome.
It's coming in and out a little bit. I'm not sure why.
Ooh.
Could you repeat that?
Sure, all of it?
Yes, please.
All. Oh, I heard an echo. I'm not sure why. Sure. Co-editor of the BIPOC special issue, her pronouns, Oregon State University, Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies, and was just saying how excited I am to see so many of the contributors here today to that issue. And I think, I'm not sure either of who's gone, if I pass Dia da Costa.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Nana. My name's Dia da Costa, she, her pronouns. I am tuning in from University of Alberta, Edmonton, Treaty 6 territory. My contribution is for the Mosaic volume, and it's called Writing Castelessly, Brahminical Supremacy in Education, Feminist Knowledge and Research. And I'm trying to ask the question of why dominant caste folks like myself write castelessly, and I try to use historical and life writing approaches to address that question.
And I believe Sarika, you still have.
Sorry, and Sririka.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sririka Stati. I'm assistant professor in the International Institute of Social Studies located in The Hague in the Netherlands. I teach gender and political economy. Right now I'm traveling. I'm in California, US. My paper is a testimonial in the Mosaic Volume. It's titled "When My Brown Got Color." It's it's kind of looking into lives in the times of white and Brahminic my experience of living a few years in the US.
Your audio is also coming in and out a little bit. I'm not exactly sure why, but hopefully it will clear up as we go along. And I'll also note for the audience that we have prepared an event program that includes each participant's fuller professional bio, along with hyperlinks to each of their pieces, which we'll be posting in the chat for you to access. All right, so I'll just start with our questions then, by noting that this year marks Meridian's 23rd anniversary, and also something that Gina did not mention is that she has been a part of this project from its conception as an idea, as well as its actualization in its first volume 1, number 1 issue in fall of 2020. So she is a long-time member of the Meridians community, and I just want to take a moment to give a special shout out to Gina for being such a wonderful, consistent, long-time, and generous collaborator. So thank you, Gina, for that and for being with us again today and for sharing your beautiful art for our Mosaic cover. But in addition to that, as I reflect on that 23-year history, which I've had the good fortune to have been a part of because I joined Smith College in the fall of 1999 as a tenure-track faculty member, just as the journal was being conceptualized and put together by an editorial collective of Smith and Wesleyan, which is where Gina was at the time, faculty, first as an author in volume 1, number 1, then as a reviewer over the years, as a member of the editorial advisory board member, and then in 2017, I was honored to take the baton of editorial leadership from Paula J. Giddings, and have been in that role since then. So that's been my relationship with Meridians, which has been incredibly rich and generative for me. And I'm curious to learn about your experience with Meridians.
I was going to ask Nana first, but maybe I will go ahead and ask Gina to say a little bit about your 20-plus year relationship to Meridians, and then we'll turn it over to Nana as a guest editor as well. Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Janetta. Oh no, is there feedback? Is that me? Is that okay? I can keep talking? Okay. Well, I think, you know, over the years, I've known several of the editors. I was literally down the road because I was, before I went to California. And people like Gail Pemberton, who was super senior at Wesleyan, the folks, Anne Ducille, who imagined, along with Ruth and others, the making of Meridian. You know, I was just a young junior faculty member in the presence of these grand dames. So this was a huge, it helped shape my thinking in terms of what is possible when people reach across, because they made something happen across institutions. That's the other thing about Meridians that I think is really, really important. But for me personally, I just have to say that the fact that over the years, I've played multiple roles. When I started to decide to brave the world and put my visual art out, like there was no way I was not going to send something to Meridians. And part of it has to do with some of my earlier work as an ethnographer has been published in there. My poetry's been published in there. And then I was like, okay, I'm about to bust out as a visual artist and Meridians needs to know about it. And I was more than honored that the work was recognized and accepted. So thank you very much. That's.
So I'll say that, you know, as I mentioned, this is Gina's beautiful art, but the fuller photo essay from which this comes will be in Indigenous Feminisms Across the World, Volume 23, number 1 in the spring. So I encourage you to go and take a look at that when it comes out. And thank you, Gina, truly. Nana, could you say a little bit about what led you to reach out to Meridians some years ago now, because we've been working together for over 2 years to materialize your fabulous issue, BIPOC Europe. So why Meridians? And could you just say a little bit about the process so that your contributors, but also the audience, might get a sense of what it's like to be a guest editor for the journal?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So my first, and how is the sound? I put my earbuds in to see if it'd be a little better. Okay, great. So I'm pretty sure I first became familiar with Meridians through my involvement with the National Women's Studies Association. So been involved there for a number of years and served on the board, served as vice president. And so through all that, I became familiar with Meridians. And then Kay Whitehead had edited a special issue on feminist pedagogy. And so as I was looking for a place to do this kind of work, Kay was one of the first people I had a conversation with, and I knew before we had the conversation that it had been a positive experience, and that was a really powerful issue on Black feminist pedagogies. And so I had that conversation, and obviously it was important for me that it was an issue, a journal that focused on women of color feminism. That was key. So I wasn't just looking for a feminist journal. And so I submitted a proposal. And once that was accepted, I think this goes to both the process and actually to why I selected the journal. Was the way that I think about it is that it really became a conversation. And what I think about that is sort of this way in which I was able to engage in feminist practice, or feminist praxis even. So it wasn't just about getting the work out there, but it was how the journal came into being. So one of the first things that Janetta suggested was to get a co-editor because of the amount of work over 2 years, as you just said, that takes. And so that was not only a great suggestion, but Janetta actually was then able to suggest and put me in contact with Shirley Ann Tate, who agreed to do this work jointly. So that was a great start to the process. And
I then think in working with the submissions, well, one, I mean, working with, of course, getting the call out, but then submissions and that process. Certainly, I mean, there are some things about it that that are about conventions of journal publishing that still need to be adhered to, and things that happen in what we might think of as in more sort of traditional ways when it comes to peer review and those types of things. But outside of that, or sort of once that had happened, I think that the way that we were able to work with contributors and work with submissions in order to create the type of special issue that we wanted, the diversity that we wanted to see represented in that issue, that was something that I certainly have never experienced in working with another journal or sort of publishing outlet. So I think that was a real example of feminist practice and doing this work. And, you know, even to the point where obviously we couldn't accept all, I mean, there just wasn't enough room, right, for all the pieces. And then, you know, sort of whatever came back from the reviews, those types of things, that we were then also able to make some suggestions and recommendations around, you know, this, we can't fit it in here because there are only so many pages that we have, or this work might need a little bit more development than what we have time for. But could it go in a future issue, or might it be able to find a home within Meridians at a different time and place? And so that to me was a practice, just a practice of care, right? A practice of care and a practice of collaboration and shared engagement. So yeah, so I think that sort of, I hope that gives a good summary of both sort of why I chose Meridians and what that process was like. It was something that I truly appreciated being a part of. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Nana. Would anyone who came out in BIPOC Europe like to speak from the author side about their experience? Please jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I can just say briefly that, you know, I'd never published in Meridians before, but it had always been on my radar and always been, you know, something I thought of as a space where you could do kind of uniquely also experimental work, and really thinking deeply about feminisms and transnationalism. And so for us, you know, as working on this piece as a collective, it was the first piece that we produced together. And it was one of those things where we really, you know, it started out as just wanting to think about how we relate to one another and support one another in our work, and thinking together about what it meant to think about a Black feminism in the Nordic context, that can attend to the specificities of that context and the nuances of that context and all the different ways that we were positioned differently, but also had this kind of kinship. But also that was always in relation, right, to other places, because we always have to read across and organize across context. And so in a way, you know, Meridian seemed really, really like a natural place, but it was really because of this special issue and how it was curated with such care, that we also felt like it was worth sort of doing something experimental, right? We all come from different kind of disciplinary backgrounds, and had never written something like this before. But so I don't think that this this work would have been possible if it wasn't a journal like Meridians. So it allowed us to really kind of be brave and experiment and try something, you know, try experimenting with relating otherwise, with imagining otherwise, with writing otherwise, and seeing if we could kind of find something meaningful in that. So yeah, it was really because of all these different elements coming together that this work was sort of even possible for us.
Thanks, Jasmine. And actually, you're reminding me of two things I want to make sure I mention that I haven't said yet, which is that this issue, BIPOC Europe, is available for free to anyone in the world. If they go to the Duke University Press website, which we'll put the link in the chat, and that's part of our wonderful partnership with DUP Journals, that every year since they've been publishing us, which is since 2017, I think, no, 2018, excuse me, they have allowed us to select one of our two issues for free access, not open access, free, right? So you don't have to be inside the academic paywall or anything like that. And you can download all the articles in the issue, and hopefully
not only read them, but use them in your classrooms, in your scholarship, and share them with your colleagues. And this is really especially important to us because we've been working really hard to globalize what we mean by transnationalism, right? So that it's not just a U.S. outward transnationalism, but global, right? Out in the world and the U.S. transnationalism. So please make note of that and share that with all your networks, panelists, but also audience members, because that's really just such a wonderful part of our partnership with Duke, and I want to make sure that we take full advantage of it. And then related to that, was something else you said, Jasmine, that is now blanking, I'm blanking on it, I'll probably come back to it. Yes, which was about, I'm going to skip into one of the questions that was a little further ahead, because I think you segued very nicely into it, which is could someone else in the participant group tell us a bit about how your piece contributes to broader conversations about feminism, race, and transnationalism, whether inside or beyond the academy? Right? So like how you're in conversation with our mission, which is to center feminism, race, transnationalism from a women of color feminist perspective. Yes, Devaleena, please jump in.
Sorry, I'm jumping in because I think I want to connect what the other panelists have been saying in response to the previous question and then answer to this. My article does not belong to the first volume, BIPOC Europe, but to the Mosaic one, but I see a connection between the two because the contributors are talking about experimenting and genres, as Jasmine was talking about, and that's where I came for my article addressing the bigger issue. And my article was more about the reason I came, and the overall theme of Meridian is I was looking for proposing a feminist epistemological model, which I call quilted epistemology, and it derived from the Black feminist art of quilting, because I was trying to find a journal where I could critique openly the pyramidal model of feminist knowledge production, where the global North and especially the Western Euro-Americanism has played a key role. And so I was looking for a place, and it was a strong battle for me because not every journal was, honestly, the gatekeeping politics is still there, even in feminist community. So not every journal was willing to accept and critique the Euro-American centrism and talk about this ecology of knowledge. And so I was looking for a platform where I could talk about quilting across disciplines. And that means not just academic disciplines, but decolonizing the boundary of academia and community, art versus craft, or theory versus performance, and knowledge that is therapeutic, knowledge that can do kind of epistemic disobedience. And so, and also resolve some of the existing limitations in transnational feminism, which is, of course, still very US-centric in concept in many ways. Then also what is going on, for example, in Palestine right now. This is a time to think, which I was not referring, of course, in my article about Palestine, but the concept of one-centric dimension of nationalism. And the educational industrial complex that feminism hasn't addressed yet, the market value of higher education in capitalist appraisements and the dominance of Western universities, and why we still devalue, is a systemic devaluation is taking place of non-Western universities, which links to de-skilling and de-credentializing migrants and academicians coming from the global South. So I saw that Meridian has that space to allow these free and open criticism and critical reflections. And so the quilted epistemology frame came because I was pushing back the colonial discourse of mapping and making it more quilting from the Black feminist practice. So I'm going to stop here.
Thank you, Devaleena. And I have to say also, like, you have been so patient with us because I know you submitted the piece many, many years ago, and it took a lot of time because it coincided, I believe, with the pandemic, and there was such a challenge getting reviewers to come through and then to actually follow through on the commitment and so forth. So I want to thank you also for sticking with us. And the result, I think, has been truly lovely in terms of your piece and the role that it plays in an appropriately titled Mosaic issue, right? Because there are resonances with the two metaphors. And you've reminded me what the second point that I wanted to raise in response to Jasmine, because it's also, I think, relevant to the comments you've made, which is that we work really hard to do precisely that, to center innovative, unconventional forms of feminist knowledge production. That's what women of color feminist knowledge production is, right? And always has been unconventional, not normative, outside, breaking with the established schemas. At the same time, because so many of our authors are tenure track faculty, women of color that we want to make sure we support, we really hew to the standard of double anonymized peer review so that it is unimpeachable from the neoliberal U.S., historically white-serving academy, right? That they can't say this work has not been reviewed. It has, rigorously, and then some. I think the difference is, and the thing that really makes us exceptional in addition to what we publish, is that what we mean by peer is truly peers. It's other feminist women of color knowledge producers who are activists, who are artists, who are scholars, right, who are creatives, who know what you're talking about and will speak to your work from a position of respect as well as rigor, right? And that's something we work really hard to ensure, and we're very proud of. So thank you for reminding me. Does anybody else want to say a word or two about how the work they've published in one of these two issues is part of this broader conversation around feminism, race, transnationalism? Natalia, please go ahead and jump in, and then Claudia, I see that your hand up is as well.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I will also say in brief and trying to correlate these two questions. Well, for me personally, I chose Meridians because I wanted to publish a paper in a journal that refers to intersectional aspects in hip hop and feminism, race, and transnationalism. And I wanted to elaborate and circulate the intersectional dimensions of Greek hip hop because beyond hip hop studies and youth studies, that it's the physical kind environment of these kind of studies. Because, to my opinion, hip hop performativities are more intrinsic to wider society processes, structures, and transformations. So I really wanted to make it to Meridians and highlight all these aspects. And our collaboration was fascinating indeed. I took great feedback on my work. Although there was a small delay because I also started many years ago this collaboration with Meridians. I think that at the end of the day, this delay of publication turned positive for my work as I had the time to provide this intertemporal perspective, self-reflect on the material, and stabilize my assumptions on gender issues and rap scenes, while at the same time, the hip-hop scene in Greece was becoming more and more rhizomatic, intersectional, and rich. And finally, regarding the question about how the piece contributes to broader conversations about feminism, I would say that doing anthropological work about hip hop gives you the opportunity to provide comparisons between the cultural appropriation of hip hop in different countries and also compare feminism and gender norms between countries. I think, although I didn't exhaustively explore and reflected on the global feminist, race, and nationalist experience of hip hop, it was a first step for me for future efforts and interrelations. And I think that the article provides a good depiction and reflection of feminist and gender issues in Greece regarding hip hop and other subcultures or youth cultures in the framework of gender in Greece. and especially regarding theories of agonism that are used in a feminist framework, and also vulnerability in resistance, as Judith Butler would put it. So that's my reflection on the Meridians collaboration from me.
Thank you, Natalia. And I'll point out, by the way, that Natalia's piece has an on the line feature on our website, which again we'll also put into the chat, because we included video that illustrates what Natalia is talking about in her article. And that's also the case for our next speaker, Claudia, whose piece also has an on the line feature. So Claudia, I'll turn it over to you, and we'll put both of those links in the chat if people want to go take a look.
Great. Thank you very much, Ginetta. And thank you also, Nana, and you, Ginetta, for your feedbacks and for the whole process, the conversation, the very respectful conversation. I wanted to go back to the subject of how my work is being informed by feminism, race, and transnationalism. First, I want to say that my work, Strategies of Visibilization, is a special installation that consists of an analysis of artists who participated in exhibitions at the Museum Moderner Kunst, Stiftung Ludwig Wien, that's MUMAC, between 1998 and 2018. And the installation compares proportions of participation by gender and geopolitical origin, and addresses questions about representation, positioning in the artistic field, and power relationships within the museological context. Feminism, race, and transnationalism play an important role in my creative work, as I want to disrupt the creation of a future where female and gender non-conforming artists are not present. We all know that artworks in collections and exhibition programs of museums are responsible for shaping the art historical canon, and this directly reflects the configuration of a national identity. My proposal analyzes then the extent of the underrepresentation of women artists from the Global South in the museological field in order to reappropriate spaces in which we are voiceless. That's an idea of bell hooks that we all know. And I understand a practical approach to feminism from a decolonial, I would say descolonial, and intersectional perspective, as one that undertakes the task of reclaiming an artistic canon that also gives recognition to the value of positions outside the center of the field. I suggest then data analysis in the museological context as a tool to become narrators of our own history. That's an idea of Grada Quilomba. And as a first step in the conversation with the art institution. So my practice is pretty much informed by these elements of feminism, race, and transnationalism. So thank you very much for the space for sharing.
Thank you, Claudia. It's really such a wonderful piece because you really show how data and visualizing data can be put to such dramatically effective use, right? And making visible what we know to be true so often. Luz Maria, you had your hand up. I haven't forgotten. I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I also wanted to thank the editors for this opportunity, and I'm so thrilled to see all of these authors here. I'm very privileged. I am also on that same boat where it took a couple of years for the piece to find a home, and I'm very happy that it was this home. My piece explores colonial processes that are hostile for women of color, in this case, Muslim women. I went to the Nador Melilla border. This is a small town that is colonized by Spain, but it's in the north of Africa. And there's this peculiar immigration process that happens. These wealthy merchants hired Muslim women to carry literally on their backs commodities back and forth the Nador Melilla border. Now, these women are called porteadoras, but they're usually called mule women, which I find really degrading. And so I focus on the example of one woman who happened to die. She was trampled by most of her co-nationals because the border is really disorganized and it's a lot of mayhem. And this mayhem is supported by authorities, both in the Melilla side and the Moroccan side. On top of that, the violence, the physical violence against these Muslim women is normalized in these processes of going back and forth. So not only do they risk their lives and their health for the benefit of all these liberal economies to function, right, by curtailing immigration and benefiting from all of these commodities coming in and out. And it benefits both economies, right, in Morocco, but mostly in Spain, in Melilla. And so I think what I want to say is that women, like Muslim women in particular, become tropes of death and injury in these globalized economies that depend on transnational labor. But I argue that it's worse than that, right? That their deaths become part of a religious and political discourse that dehumanizes them, and on top of that, blames them for the risks they take. So for porteadoras, borders like the Nador-Melilla border function as places of violence and terror, while the meaning of their deaths and injuries support gender violence, and it's used to cement the sovereignty of the state. So both of these states continue to support this process, and there's a blame game, right? From conservatives who continue to blame the Moroccan government and Muslim women, and then of course the Moroccan government blaming the Melillan authorities for discriminating and continuing to benefit from the bodies of Muslim women in particular. So I engage in dialogue with specifically transnational feminisms. I chose Meridians because I know they are committed to feminism, but feminism of color. And that's really important because this piece would not have fit in other journals who say that they are committed to feminism, but they only publish white feminism. And so Meridians continues to support transnational feminism and feminism of color. And I really appreciate Devaleena bringing out Black feminism in particular. I actually worked on the special issue on bell hooks not too long ago. Excuse me. But again, thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Ms. María. And that actually leads us really nicely to a question about what role does activism and protest play in your work? Because clearly, that piece, for example, is about shining a light on an injustice and on the use to which women are put by states, right, that have counter narratives about culpability, right? So I want to ask some of the other folks to speak about what role do activism and protest play in your work as scholars, writers, creatives, and what role can or has Meridians played in amplifying your work and your voice? Somebody, Julia, I keep looking at you because your piece was so, I think, of a piece with this question. Are you up for answering it?
Sure, yeah. Activism really motivates my practice, and it's why I write. As an ethnographer who studies social activism and works particularly with the Puerto Rican activist community in Central Florida, it plays a huge role in the work that I do. So thank you to Meridians for really centering those voices within the piece. And theoretically and ethnographically, right, I engage with this idea of crisis. Because I started my ethnography in 2016, and not only was it the shooting at Pulse nightclub, but the following year, Hurricane Maria, right, the fiscal crisis, countless examples in between of mass violence. We just had the 1-year anniversary here in Colorado Springs of the shooting at Club Q. So there are constant and very painful, right, reminders of the timeliness, really, of this work and how it's affected marginalized communities, but also that there are communities that are pushing back and are refusing and are really combating their own oppression. And so in the piece, I really try to emphasize that it's about more than gun violence, right? It's about also the continued urgency of intersectionality, to quote, Kimberly Crenshaw, Patricia Hill Collins, and other Black feminists. Also in, our personal or social or our academic worlds, and how these conversations really need to span these geographies, right? Because activism itself is very much happening transnationally.
Thank you, Julie. Sharifka, your piece was a creative writing piece, and yet I feel like it's also part of this conversation, although I have a question specifically for our creatives, but would you be interested in taking a pass at this piece, at that round? Could you say a little bit about your piece, which, by the way, I still think about and I just thought was so amazing. And I think it's a form of activism as well.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. I hope you can hear me now and better than earlier. My piece was, it's the title, When My Brown Got Colored. It is a testimonial, my first time writing a testimonial, maybe the last time too, I don't know. It is based on my experience of moving to the US and living there a few years in Charlottesville at the University of Virginia. My first few years, the time when I moved out of India with the right wing coming to power under Modi, and then moving and coming there to the times when Trump came to power there. And then now I'm in the Netherlands, where also the right wing government has come into power. The emerging, extreme nationalist groups in different parts of the world, and how the immigrant community, immigrant women of color, especially how they experience it, is one thing which I have felt very strongly in moving between different countries and nations. And I think one particular point I would like to mention here is that how sometimes immigrants themselves have become part in this nationalist groups, like they become supportive of the right wing and against the refugees or new immigrants coming into these countries. And in fact, we have experienced that the lower, including the lower caste communities, sometimes supporting or become part of the right-wing government in India, to how immigrants and sometimes Black or other people, even women of color, have become strong supporters of right-wing movements and nationalist movements in different parts of the world now. And I think that is something very important for me to understand and learn and analyze very critically to that how this process is emerging, and how as people who and as feminists who are sensitive to issues of race and transnational politics, how do we update ourselves and kind of look at this new phenomenon? And this is the context in which, like the earlier speakers were talking about, the neoliberal space within academia, and how we are all kind of part of this, this complex, context emerging. So it's important for me to, it was important for me to compare these different contexts where your location changes and you sometimes become an insider and an outsider. And there are these intense feelings you have as a new immigrant, but however, many other immigrants who have been there for a while actually doesn't feel that way. And kind of, the visibilizing and the invisibilizing, which I have talked about in that paper, is something pretty much like something which I, even after writing and publishing this piece, as you know, it took also a few years for it to come out. But by the time I had a feeling that I had moved on and a lot has happened, and I kind of changed my context. At the same time, I got very mixed and different responses on the paper, in the sense that people who were kind of part of my world at that time in the US, the responses were very different from what I imagined it to be. And many others who were kind of strangers to this whole situation kind of gave me a more closely connecting kind of, they could feel it more, intensely, and how I was saying what I was saying. And I also enjoyed the other paper by Dia and on the, writing Castelessly a lot, because I thought it was a perfect following. And in fact, many things I was feeling about the question of caste in this, you know. So this volume kind of, the many papers here kind of really connected very closely to many of my thoughts and how I was, you know, through feminist epistemologies, how do we kind of, in a reflective way, kind of locate ourselves and kind of shift our context and kind of, yeah. So this really, though it was the first time I was writing a testimonial, it really, I think it was a difficult process for me to write. It's the first, you know, when you write about yourself, and it's something very different from usually when you write an academic piece. So I really enjoyed it. It's very close to my heart, this paper, but I also felt like I was in the right place in this volume. Just thanks to Meridians to giving that space in which I could also connect and relate to a lot of other authors maybe they had to say here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And actually, I am going to go ahead and pass it over to Dia because your piece does speak directly to this issue. And I want to thank you both also because you introduced me to the anti-caste movement in the United States specifically, right? And the debates around these questions globally. So Dia, would you like to say something to this question?
Yeah, sure. Shireka, thank you for mentioning that because I also read your piece because I was like, oh, I think that this might have synergies. There might be affinities here, and sure enough, there were. My piece is really just trying to use my power and position and place within the academy as a dominant caste Brahmin. And Brahmins have given themselves monopoly control over religious and then secular education for like 2,500 years. And so it's not a surprise that dominant caste folks dominate the academy. And so I was trying to use that privilege to really make much more, bring into the academy the anti-caste movement, Dalit feminist voice and theory and critiques and politics, which we have taken an approach to that is either defensive or exclusionary and erasing, or outright just like willful ignorance in the kind of Charles Mills sense of the term of like a need to not know what we actually do know, but we need to not know it. And so for me, Meridians was it was an experiment, to be perfectly honest. I wasn't sure if it would work, but because of the attention to transnationalism, I thought that maybe there is a way in which they would see the critique of categories of women of color as far too flat a category, which is what Dalit feminists have been saying, that it does not take into account or does not allow us to attend to Brahminical supremacy, which actually precedes and exceeds and lives beyond post-colonial, lives in post-colonial contexts, right? So it precedes British colonialism and it still survives. And so for me, it was really about asking why dominant caste feminists, including and especially South Asian transnational feminists, like Spivak and Mohanty and, Richanagar and me, like all of us, we write castelessly, just as white feminists, the experience we have of submitting stuff to journals and them not being able to recognize their whiteness. We do the same thing, but we don't know how to recognize it, and we are read as racialized, and so it is not apparent how we are reproducing this within, of course, the Indian Academy, ground zero of that, but also the North American Academy where we exist, right? And so I try to kind of historically trace the fact that we write castelessly because we have given ourselves power with regard to land and labor and knowledge production and the definition of culture and what counts as merit and what is worthy and what is not worthy, and all of that comes together. And that's part of why we write castelessly, because we've given ourselves that structural position and hoarded that structural position for ourselves. And we also write castelessly because we have literally been taught to do so in educational institutions through canonical writings, including by basically studying caste. It's not like caste scholarship doesn't exist by dominant caste folks, but it's always the study of the lives of others. It is always the study of the lives of others, and we never think about and never have been asked to think. I mean, we've been asked to think about this by Dalit feminists for a long time, but we haven't done it enough. To think about how the study of the lives of others shapes not just our savior feminism, but also our solidarity feminism, and that the line between savior and solidarity feminism is much more murky than we would like to think and than we would like to acknowledge, and that we would, because both rely on the study of and relationship to the lives of others that we get to kind of access as and when it suits us. And so it's really just like a methodological offering in relation to what I heard from Dalit feminist activists calling for us to shed some light into our own, can I swear, stuff, that we need to shed light on our own biographies, our own structures and investments in power and reproducing power. And so that's what the contribution is.
Thank you, Dia. Jasmine, I did see that you had your hand up, so I want to give you the opportunity to respond to one of the earlier comments before I ask my next question.
Sure, yeah. I just wanted to kind of respond to the question about activism, because it's interesting. Like, I don't know that we actually sort of talked about activism. Like, it wasn't part of our analysis in the article itself, but it was the impetus for the whole project, for our whole collective, for writing this. And that was because we were writing this in a context, right? We were writing this after a year of pandemic and uprisings against anti-Black state violence. And several of us were really heavily involved in that work in different national contexts, had been really personally impacted. And we're also working with communities doing that work, right, in our research. And so the whole impetus for thinking about counter archiving had to do with the kind of specificities of the erasure of Black life and Black struggle in the Nordic context, and the way that communities constantly have to create a counter archive to say that we exist, to say that we have histories, to say that we have these struggles, we have these experiences, and to create alternatives, right? To create a record of Black life lived in the Nordic context. And so, even just thinking about the question of the counter archive was deeply tied to activism. And then the question of social care or collective care came in both in our thinking about our relationship to the communities that we are a part of, the communities we work with, the communities to whom we are accountable in our work, right, as activist scholars, but also then to one another, right, what it meant to try to straddle both this work in the community and for the community and of the community, and also to be in the violent space that is academia. And when we started this, the majority of us were graduate students, right? And we were thinking a lot about what this space has to offer and what the limitations are. And so for us, this kind of practice was really about kind of care and sustenance in the face of so much violence in the world and in the work, and trying to think about, is there another way for us to relate? Is there another way for us to collaborate? Is there another way for us to relate to writing that doesn't feel so exploitative, that doesn't feel like it perpetuates that violence, right? And that creates space for also the politics of this work, because it's deeply political and deeply personal. And so really, in essence, I think that the entire project and this piece also is really kind of a meditation on Black feminist praxis and politics and doing activist scholarship in a time of, you know, we thought about it a lot as, right, these intersections of crises of both the pandemic, which limited us from actually being able to physically connect, right? We couldn't actually meet because borders had closed between our countries. And at the same time, we really needed that togetherness. And then there was also the uprisings and the repression of Black activism at that time and the denial of the relevance of the Black Lives Matter movement in the Nordic context. So kind of trying to sort out the storm or living through that storm, we were trying to figure out, you know, what are ways that we can sustain activist work and scholarly work and our humanity and sanity and so forth. So I appreciate that question.
And you know, Jasmine, that actually, I think, leads really nicely into Kami's work, which is all about the question of care and how it's manifest and central and yet so often forgotten. Because your work really does also do that kind of archiving and bringing to light that which is also, you know, hidden in plain sight. So could you tell us a little bit about your work, Kami, and any other thoughts you might have in response to the conversation so far?
You know, appreciate getting invited to this wonderful conversation here. Yeah, so when we think about death care work now, it's really come into the spotlight with COVID-19. And some of you may be very familiar with death doulas now. You know, they have just sprang onto the scene in talking about marginalization. These are white women that have claimed a space that they were never in. Saying that they were the kind of the original care workers, very similar to when we think about the natural childbirth movement. Women of privilege were never caring for their own children. And so there was some kind of cognitive dissonance when you're thinking about death care work, and even the term doula, Greek for slave, and thinking about the folks that were doing this work. And so my research was when you look at the work that Black women in the early 20th century were doing around funeral care, as it had already professionalized, these Black women were always there. In their communities, they were the leaders. You know, that's why I make the argument that these were race women. These were the progressive era women that were part of their NAACP community, part of the Clean Block crew. But that negotiation of, you know, the idea of femininity and motherhood and what does it mean to be a woman was always different in the Black community, right? You know, these were the women that went to school. They were supposed to be the leaders, but yet they still had to negotiate being a wife and a mother. And that whole, you know, cult of domesticity, cult of true womanhood, you know, that whole thing. But also there is an activist element to my work. I use African American deathways and death work as a lens to understand the Black experience. And death, whether we're talking about last rites ritual, the RIP t-shirt, or even death care workers, is about freedom. There's a real agency around really all and a lot of the work that I do. So yeah, you know, really, really happy to be able to put these women back into a narrative that they created, which was so odd, you know, as even writing this. But really happy to have a space here at Meridians.
Thank you so much, Kami. And actually, that I think segues. I hope you see it, Erika, but I feel like that segues really nicely into your poem, which I'll ask the question specifically because I also want to open the floor back up. But I want to turn our focus to art, which has been considered central to the Meridians project since its founding in 2000, beginning with the regular inclusion of poetry, prose and creative nonfiction, and the featuring of visual art, both 1- and 3-dimensional, on our covers and in our pages. Indeed, at Meridians, we use the term knowledge production rather than scholarship to signal our belief that art making is a form of knowledge production, perhaps especially for women of color feminists around the world who have been historically excluded from or diminished within hegemonic didactic institutions, from educational institutions to museums to the performing arts. We're fortunate to be joined today by several of the creatives who contributed to Volume 22. And I am going to turn it over to Erika, who's been waiting patiently, to speak to the role that feminism, race, and transnationalism play in your creative work, but also to tell us a bit about the poem, the context it was written in, and anything else you'd like to share with us about it.
Sure thing. My poem was a piece like many here. I have no idea why I'm echoing. 1 second, I'm looking for my mouse. Okay. The short version is, the last year of my grandmother's life, we did not speak because my grandmother did not want to hear about my girlfriend. However, in the last couple of months, the reason we did speak was because I had a lumpectomy a month before she passed. And so we needed to report that I was okay. This is important because not only are we in the middle of the pandemic, no, the pandemic was just starting. And what else was happening? Oh, and there were earthquakes in Puerto Rico. And I would argue that the way my grandmother passed was a consequence of the brain drain that happened in Puerto Rico post Hurricane Maria. And so I had to make peace with how she died. I like to tell people I lost her twice. First, because she was afraid of what me being publicly out with her would do for both of us. And then second, because she passed. And I took the narrative I didn't want to hear, because my mother didn't think about it, when she asked about my grandmother's last moments. And so I used meditating on that moment. And I'm glad this poem took time so that I could think about form, structure, and narrative to really talk about the generational gap. So often when we talk about the generational gap and going back home, it's mother-daughter. And for me, it's always been my relationship with my grandmother and what I understand about transnational gaps around memory are that specifically. And so I had started it in a writing workshop with Sally Wen-Mao in 2020, right after she passed, submitted it for the In the Wake special issue. The editors were like, no, this makes sense somewhere else. And I'm glad it's in this issue, especially because I started a new job a year ago. And so for me, I wanted to figure out how to bridge the complexity of my grief of being near death, right? And coming into this calm and then bearing witness to the distance my queerness gave to being able to grieve with my grandmother and my childhood summer community in Puerto Rico. Because so often our elders take for granted that our freedom doesn't feel free if they're still hurting. And I wanted to pay homage to that while being tender with how she thought she was doing what was best for us. So yeah.
Go ahead and take a look at the poem and read it and reread it and sit with it a bit. The issue that Erika mentioned, that referencing In the Wake, is our Feminist Mornings issue that was co-guest edited by Jyoti Puri and Kimberly Juanita Brown for the fall of 2022. Yeah, I felt, I'll take responsibility, I pulled you into Mosaic, which I curated in-house because I just felt like it resonated really well with the contents of Mosaic. So thank you for being gracious about the repositioning.
No, thank you.
Yeah, I want to ask, does anybody else want to say a few words about the context in which you wrote or created, in the case of visual artworks, submitted and saw your piece published? Because again, it does take years. It's just the nature of academic journal publishing, and even more so during the pandemic. But would anyone else like to speak to how context mattered? Yes, Gina, please.
Sure. Thank you so much. I think for me, part of what, as I said earlier, about the need to have this other component of my practice have its outing, if you will, in some ways, in a familiar space, but that familiarity is also intellectual. It's also in solidarity. It's also, I think that, you brought it up and it was well engaged in terms of how Meridians does transnationalism, which is so different than the add, otherness and stir, or add the global and stir. And so that is something that I think we couldn't highlight enough. I mean, I'm in California, where the world is so insular. There isn't a world. There's the ocean, and then there are trees, and I love it. But I was just talking to somebody about the fact that sometimes it's hard to grasp that you're living someplace where difference is everywhere, but difference is not actually engaged. So for me, I think the covers of Meridians that I remember were always covers that just took you straight into the world. I don't think you could look at a Meridians cover and say that you could place it and say, this is coming from an American journal. I don't think you can say that, because over the years, you have consistently, with different editors and so forth, been open to artists whose work was pushing us to understand and see the world in a much broader and aesthetically always beautiful, always gorgeous, and very critical, right? And so that to do that combination and do that well, right? So I'm remembering, the Carrie Mae Weems, with her back, and just seeing, how majestic she looks. And then I don't remember the name of the artist, but the cover with the woman's face and the aloe. And then there was the Miriam Chancy cover that I had a piece in. They were always super striking, aesthetically beautiful, very well done work that pushed us out of our comfort zone. So for me, even though the way I approach the work, I feel like there's a subtlety to it, but it was a subtlety that I felt like would not get lost, right? The fact that I'm using calabashes, and what that would automatically mean because of who Meridians is. I knew there was going to be an understanding of what this medium is. So then the deeper significations would be read, as opposed to, and I've had that experience of sort of sharing my work where people are like, oh, what is that? And you have to go, well, it's a calabash or a gourd or whatever, and they don't even know what that is. So the fact that you are going to have some sort of very basic points of foundational recognition, right? Or being seen. And then it's the deeper layers that got engaged. So for me, it's there's something that Meridians has been doing where art is concerned for 20 years or so. And it continued to do it, and it's doing it really, really well. And so I wanted to be a part of that. I mean, there's no two things about it. When I sent the stuff in, I was just like, well, that would be really cool. You know what I mean? Because it meant something to me that I didn't have to explain my work too much, because people were going to get it. And then there were different levels of signification that could be interrogated. So thank you.
Absolutely. And I have to say, as a sister Española, scholar, thinker, la calabaza, right? And not only that, but the shells, right? The divination shells, like all of it was just really resonant, and it does speak to you, right? In these indexicals that not everyone has to understand, right? And you pointing out something, you're reminding me to share with folks that we do have this beautiful catalog that our intern and staff put together earlier this year that's on our website. Again, we'll put the link in the chat, but that it features all of the art. Here's the one that Gina was just referencing. And it was Miriam Chancy who initiated
the inclusion of art on the covers. The first, I think 3 issues or 4 issues were just, you know, I think red or blue, very, very basic. But when Miriam came on board, that was one of the innovations that she brought to the journal, and we have sustained it all the way through. And I really do think that it is something that distinguishes us, because we also publish people from like internationally renowned artists like Carrie Mae Weems to, you know, a Dominican girl from Granby, Massachusetts, who published this art with us, right? And everybody in between. And that is something that we take great pride in. So if you have art that you want to share and send to us, please do. It's actually the only thing that we pay a small stipend for, because artists have to eat, right? And we can't afford much, but we do try to honor that work by offering a small stipend. And the catalog does include the cover and the table of contents for every issue that we have published. I also wish I could show you, and maybe we'll pop the flyer into the chat, the cover art for the forthcoming issue on indigenous feminisms across the world, which is this beautiful piece by Palestinian feminist artist Diana Barak, I think is her last name, and it is just quite beautiful and rich and does all the things that you're referring to, Gina. We have about 10 minutes left, and I want to give the opportunity for this amazing group to ask questions of one another, or if there are thoughts that you have now in response to having heard each other speak. You really do exemplify the mosaic and the richness that is Meridian's content, not only in this volume, but I think historically, and yet how it fits, right? How all of your work just really resonates and amplifies and builds with one another. But do any of you have a question for someone else who's already spoken? Or a comment? Or something else you'd like to say about your work that you forgot to say when you were on the spot?
I have a comment for Dia de Costa. I look forward to revisiting your article, because one of the things I'm working on in forthcoming work is the role of colorism in Latino studies and how it functions differently, and it is, for the most part, a byproduct of Western colonialism. However, I feel like there's something we can learn from you and what it means, right? Because of how colorism gatekeeps among Latinos, whether Hispanic Caribbean like myself, or even across ethno-national lines in ways that are regionally based. So thank you for your work.
Can I just respond real
please
quick?
do, yeah.
Thank you, Erika. That's very generous of you. I'm definitely going to be reading your poem as well, just partly because I lost someone during COVID as well, and just figuring out how to grieve was it was something. And so thank you for doing that very difficult work. But I also want to say, yes, please read it, and please read Dalit Feminists, because really most of what I have said in there, in terms of the framework and the theoretical and political points, comes from them. Thank you.
Someone else? Natalia.
Yeah, I will try to sum up some of my thoughts responding to your beautiful questions. Well, I'm personally making anthropology at home, and I'm trying to cultivate and be engaged with public and applied anthropology. And this is a kind of academic activism, at least in my interpretation, okay? That means that I'm collaborating with key informants in several projects here in Greece regarding feminists in hip hop, and some of them are the protagonists also of this article, of this piece. And of course, I'm the director of ethnographic films, and in this way I promote an audiovisual pedagogy, I would say, on femininities and hip hop feminism. So my piece in Meridians, I think subtly at least, resonates with this audiovisual work and promoted the voices of rap and dance activism, especially on the part of some individuals and groups, not all of them, okay, such as queer rap crews, women of color rappers in Greece, and queer dance communities, as well as trans feminist collaborative works. And as a last comment on the things you mentioned about this art making, your notion of art making as a form of knowledge production, I would say that the content analysis on rap lyrics or spoken word poetry that I provided, I think is definitely relating to this focus of meridians. And yes, my interpretation of the lyrical content in the article, I think that correlates with this knowledge production that you mentioned. And this knowledge production has a lot to do with hip hop and its fifth element, that is knowledge and the transmission of hip hop knowledge. So maybe I'm thinking that through this piece, without maybe knowing it, I both reacted to your notion of art making as a form of knowledge production, but also served hip hop pedagogy and circulation of hip hop knowledge for both a broad and specific audience. Okay, and the same is the same as I do with my documentaries. So just that from me. I hope to see you all again.
Actually,
Maybe to another meeting.
I'm going to thank you for that, Natalia, and I want to bring it back to Julie because art and public art, spontaneous public art, was such a part of the Pulse massacre's aftermath, and you talk about it in your piece. Do you want to pick that thread up?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that because I'm really concerned also with the materiality, right, that arises after these events. And yeah, so I was struck by these public memorials, right? And the art that people were leaving behind, whether it was chalked on the sidewalk or, painted or, paper cards that people were leaving at the sites. And so I try to include photographs in there because it also, right, decenters the whiteness of the narrative following Pulse. And that's oftentimes included with these pan-ethnic identifiers and these umbrella terms like LGBTQ. And if you have a chance to look at those photographs, you could really see these elements of Puerto Ricanidad and Latinidad, right? Whether it was a queer Puerto Rican flag or just writings and drawings, right, that included writing in Spanish. And to me, that was something that really captivated my attention while I was doing field work and that I thought had to be a part of that research.
Yeah, and again, it's creating a counter archive saying we are here, we're here, right? We were here, we are here, and we will be here. We have about 4 minutes left, and Kami, yes, I see your hand. Go ahead.
I thought I should jump in. Hearing Erika talk about her poem, then Julie, and then others, I'm hearing a thread of grief work, and the ephemeral memorials. That is very common for marginalized peoples, right? If you're thinking about ghost bikes, if you're thinking about RIP T-shirts, if you're thinking about makeshift cemeteries that happened after George Floyd. And then also struck by what Erika was talking about with queer death. I just jotted some notes down really quickly, but narrative and documenting is very important with that community because there is these layers of grief, just like you were talking about of, reconciling the kind of, not animosity, but what happens if there's not acceptance of the lifestyle or how someone has lived their life. It definitely comes out in death. And so documenting, thinking about in the tradition of Audre Lorde and the cancer journals, that becomes very important for marginalized communities. So I really just wanted to throw that out there. marking people of color daring to mark themselves on the landscape of the living, and using death to do so is something that I definitely deal with in my own work.
Thank you, Kami. And I think actually that's a wonderful place to close, because it's so, I think it so evocatively captures what we've been trying to do for 23 years, right? Is to mark the landscape of academia, the landscape of public conversations around what it means to be, right? To exist in our world, in our bodies and through our histories. So I want to thank you all for joining us today, for sending your work to Meridians, for hanging in there with us over the years that it took to bring it into the light, a long process of birth. And thank you for hanging in there and for coming today, and for reading us, for citing us, for teaching us. And I hope that if you ever are in the Smith College area, that you'll come by and visit us. We have a beautiful new office space, 22 Green Street, Northampton, Massachusetts, and we really would be very happy to welcome you. I want to also point out that we have actually open right now, we'll put this final link, the Elizabeth Alexander Creative Writing Award competition, which is open until December 31st. And the winner or winners of that competition have the possibility of spending a week with us here at Smith, at Meridians. And we just hosted our 2023 poetry winner, Yeli Saweda Kamara, whose piece is also in the Mosaic issue. So keep that in mind too. Thank you all again. Be well. Happy holidays, whatever you may celebrate over the coming weeks of this year, and take good care. Adios.
Thank you. Goodbye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Hope to see you again.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.